An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals by David Hume quotes, "An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals by David Hume is a significant philosophical work that focuses on the foundation of moral judgments and the nature of virtue. In this treatise, Hume presents an argument that moral distinctions arise not from reason alone, but from sentiment, emphasizing the role of human feelings in moral evaluations. He examines the general principles of morals, qualities such as benevolence, justice, and the pleasure that comes from utility." Hume positions this book as an accessible exploration of his philosophical views on ethics, distinct from the earlier, more complex, treatise of human nature. This inquiry aims to make his thoughts on morality clearer, arguing that virtues are defined largely by their capacity to promote happiness and social well-being. Quote 1. "Disputes with men, pertinaciously obstinate in their principles, are, of all others, the most irksome." This quote highlights the frustration of engaging in arguments with people who stubbornly hold on to their beliefs. It suggests that debating with such individuals is futile, as they are not genuinely interested in the truth, but are driven by obstinacy or the desire to oppose others. When arguments are rooted in personal pride rather than reason, resolution becomes impossible. Quote 2. "There has been a controversy started of late, much better worth examination, concerning the general foundation of morals, whether they be derived from reason or from sentiment." Here, Hume introduces a key philosophical debate on whether moral values arise from logical reasoning or human feelings. The question underpins much of moral philosophy, questioning whether moral truths are universal or subject to individual emotional responses, like beauty or aesthetic judgment. Quote 3. "The end of all moral speculations is to teach us our duty, and, by proper representations of the deformity of vice and beauty of virtue, beget correspondent habits, and engage us to avoid the one and embrace the other." This statement outlines the purpose of moral philosophy, which is to inspire people to live virtuously. Hume argues that by clearly depicting the ugliness of vice and the beauty of virtue, we cultivate good habits and steer our actions towards moral living, showing that moral thought has practical consequences. Quote 4. "Extinguish all the warm feelings and prepossessions in favor of virtue, and all disgust or aversion to vice. Render men totally indifferent towards these distinctions. And morality is no longer a practical study, nor has any tendency to regulate our lives and actions." Hume suggests that without emotional investment in the concepts of right and wrong, morality loses its relevance. If people become indifferent to moral distinctions, ethics ceases to guide human behavior, and moral philosophy becomes a purely theoretical exercise with no real-world implications. Quote 5. "These arguments on each side, and many more might be produced, are so plausible that I am apt to suspect they may, the one as well as the other, be solid and satisfactory, and that reason and sentiment concur in almost all moral determinations and conclusions." Hume proposes that both reason and sentiment play a role in moral judgments. He acknowledges the strength of arguments from both sides, suggesting that moral conclusions likely arise from a combination of rational thought and emotional response, instead of relying solely on one or the other. Quote 6. "The final sentence, 'It is probable,' which pronounces characters and actions amiable or odious, praiseworthy or blamable, that which stamps on them the mark of honor or infamy, approbation or censure, depends on some internal sense or feeling, which nature has made universal in the whole species." This quote conveys Hume's belief that ultimate moral judgments come from an internal, instinctive feeling shared by all humans. While reasoning may be involved, it is this natural emotional response that solidifies our moral opinions, pointing to a universal human capacity for ethical discernment. Quote 7. "The very nature of language guides us almost infallibly in forming a judgment of this nature. And as every tongue possesses one set of words which are taken in a good sense, and another in the opposite. Hume emphasizes the role of language in shaping moral judgments. He argues that languages inherently distinguish between good and bad qualities, which shows how deeply moral values are embedded in human culture. By observing how people use language, we can discern which traits are esteemed or condemned in society. Quote 8. Men are now cured of their passion for hypotheses and systems in natural philosophy, and will hearken to no arguments but those which are derived from experience. It is full time they should attempt a like reformation in all moral disquisitions, and reject every system of ethics, however subtle or ingenious, which is not founded on fact and observation. In this passage, Hume calls for a reform in moral philosophy similar to that in natural science. He advocates for ethics based on empirical observation and experience rather than abstract theories. Hume believes that grounding morality in real-life examples will make it more practical and less prone to error. Quote 9. It may be esteemed, perhaps, a superfluous task to prove that the benevolent or softer affections are estimable, and wherever they appear, engage the approbation and goodwill of mankind. This quote expresses the idea that benevolent qualities, such as kindness and compassion, are universally recognized and admired. Hume suggests that these softer, caring traits naturally attract the approval and good wishes of others, as they are fundamental to human social life and are highly valued in every culture. Quote 10. You have not observed that no citizen has ever yet worn mourning on my account. Here, Hume refers to the dying words of Pericles, the Athenian statesman, who remarks that none of his fellow citizens have ever had to mourn his actions. This statement emphasizes that true greatness lies not in military victories or political success, but in living in such a way that one causes no harm or sorrow to others, underscoring the importance of benevolence and kindness. Quote 11. In men of more ordinary talents and capacity, the social virtues become, if possible, still more essentially requisite, there being nothing eminent in that case to compensate for the want of them, or preserve the person from our severest hatred, as well as contempt. This quote points out that for individuals without exceptional abilities, social virtues like kindness and empathy are even more critical. Without extraordinary talents to fall back on, the lack of these virtues can lead to a person's downfall, as they are essential for earning respect and avoiding scorn from others. Quote 12. His sole prerogative is to afford shelter to inferiors who repose themselves under his cover and protection. In this passage, Hume stresses that a person in a position of power or eminence has a singular privilege, which is to offer protection and support to those who depend on them. True leadership, according to Hume, is marked by the benevolent use of one's elevated status to provide security and care for others. Quote 13. It will suffice to remark, what will readily, I believe, be allowed, that no qualities are more entitled to the general goodwill and approbation of mankind than beneficence and humanity, friendship and gratitude, natural affection, and public spirit. Hume observes that qualities such as generosity, compassion, friendship, and gratitude are universally admired and approved by humanity. These virtues, stemming from a deep sense of sympathy and concern for others, are the foundation of social harmony and are naturally held in high esteem. Quote 14. As these topics of praise never fail to be employed, and with success, where we would inspire esteem for anyone, may it not thence be concluded that the utility resulting from the social virtues forms, at least, a part of their merit, and is one source of that approbation and regard so universally paid to them? Hume suggests that the usefulness of social virtues like benevolence plays a key role in the praise they receive. He implies that part of why such virtues are universally admired is because of their practical benefits to society, as they promote well-being and cohesion among people. Quote 15. From him the hungry receive food, the naked clothing, the ignorant and slothful skill and industry. This quote emphasizes the role of a beneficent person in providing for the needs of others. A benevolent individual not only offers tangible resources like food and clothing to those in need, but also empowers the ignorant and lazy by imparting knowledge and work ethic, thereby uplifting those around them through kindness and generosity. Quote 16. When we recommend even an animal or a plant as useful and beneficial, we give it an applause and recommendation suited to its nature. Hume observes that even non-human entities like animals and plants are praised based on their utility to society. The concept of usefulness transcends human virtues and applies universally to all beings, implying that our admiration is often tied to the practical benefits they bring, whether in nature or human society. Quote 17. In all determinations of morality, this circumstance of public utility is ever principally in view. This quote underlines Hume's assertion that utility is the guiding principle in moral judgments. Whether in philosophical debates or everyday life, public usefulness remains a central criterion for determining moral good, emphasizing that ethical actions are those which contribute to the well-being of society. Quote 18. Giving alms to common beggars is naturally praised, because it seems to carry relief to the distressed and indigent. But when we observe the encouragement thence arising to idleness and debauchery, we regard that species of charity rather as a weakness than a virtue. Here, Hume points out the complexity of charitable acts, noting that while giving alms is initially viewed as virtuous, the unintended consequences, such as promoting idleness, can lead to a re-evaluation of the action. This demonstrates how moral judgment often depends on the broader effects of an act on society. Quote 19. Tyrannicide, or the assassination of usurpers and oppressive princes, was highly extolled in ancient times, but history and experience having since convinced us that this practice increases the jealousy and cruelty of princes, a Timoleon and a Brutus are now considered as very improper models for imitation. Hume reflects on changing moral perspectives over time. In ancient times, the killing of tyrants was celebrated as a means of protecting society, but historical experience has shown that such actions can have the opposite effect, increasing tyranny rather than reducing it. This highlights the evolving nature of moral standards based on collective experience. Quote 20. Upon the whole, then, it seems undeniable that nothing can bestow more merit on any human creature than the sentiment of benevolence in an eminent degree. Hume asserts that benevolence is the highest virtue one can possess. A person who demonstrates a profound concern for the well-being of others earns the greatest moral praise, as their kindness and compassion directly contribute to the happiness and welfare of society. Quote 21. The social virtues are never regarded without their beneficial tendencies, nor viewed as barren and unfruitful. This quote emphasizes that virtues like kindness and compassion are always linked to their positive effects on society. These virtues are not empty gestures. They lead to tangible benefits, such as social harmony and collective well-being, underscoring their practical and moral importance. Quote 22. That justice is useful to society, and consequently that part of its merit at least must arise from that consideration, it would be a superfluous undertaking to prove. This quote establishes the foundational idea that the merit of justice is largely derived from its utility to society. Hume argues that justice's value is self-evident because it preserves social order and promotes well-being, making it indispensable for any structured community. Quote 23. Justice, in that case, being totally useless, would be an idle ceremonial, and could never possibly have place in the catalogue of virtues. Hume suggests that in a hypothetical world where there is no scarcity and everyone's needs are effortlessly met, the concept of justice would be redundant. Since there would be no conflicts over resources or property, the very necessity of justice would vanish, showing that its existence is tied to practical utility. Quote 24. The use and tendency of that virtue is to procure happiness and security, by preserving order in society. But where the society is ready to perish from extreme necessity, no greater evil can be dreaded from violence and injustice. In this passage, Hume addresses the limits of justice in situations of extreme emergency. He argues that when a society is on the brink of collapse, the usual rules of justice are suspended, as the immediate need for survival outweighs concerns about fairness, illustrating that justice is a function of maintaining societal stability. Quote 25. The rage and violence of public war. What is it but a suspension of justice among the warring parties, who perceive that this virtue is now no longer of any use or advantage to them? Hume points out that in times of war, justice is set aside because it no longer serves the interests of the conflicting parties. This demonstrates that justice is contingent on its usefulness. When it ceases to be advantageous, it is temporarily abandoned, revealing its dependence on social conditions. Quote 26. Thus, the rules of equity or justice depend entirely on the particular state and condition in which men are placed, and owe their origin and existence to that utility, which results to the public from their strict and regular observance. Here, Hume asserts that justice is not an absolute or universal virtue, but rather one that arises from specific social conditions. Its very existence is tied to its utility, meaning that justice exists to serve the greater good and is shaped by the needs and circumstances of society. Quote 27. The happiness of mankind, the order of society, the harmony of families, the mutual support of friends, are always considered as the result of their gentle dominion over the breasts of men. This quote emphasizes that social virtues like kindness and justice are essential for the well-being and harmony of society. Hume suggests that these virtues guide human interactions in a way that fosters happiness, unity, and mutual support among individuals, reinforcing the idea that morality is deeply connected to societal order. Quote 28. History, experience, reason sufficiently instruct us in this natural progress of human sentiments, and in the gradual enlargement of our regards to justice, in proportion as we become acquainted with the extensive utility of that virtue. Hume highlights the evolving nature of justice as human societies grow and develop. As people realize the benefits of justice, its scope broadens and its importance becomes more ingrained in societal norms. This growth in understanding reflects the increasing recognition of justice's practical value. Quote 29. The good of mankind is the only object of all these laws and regulations. This quote emphasizes that the ultimate purpose of laws and rules surrounding justice is to promote the welfare of society. Hume argues that the laws governing property and justice are designed to serve the common good, and their legitimacy stems from their utility to mankind. Quote 30. We must search for those rules which are, on the whole, most useful and beneficial. Hume suggests that when forming laws or principles of justice, the guiding criterion should be their overall usefulness and benefit to society. The best laws are those that serve the collective well-being rather than being based on arbitrary or rigid principles. Quote 31. Who sees not, for instance, that whatever is produced or improved by a man's art or industry ought, forever, to be secured to him in order to give encouragement to such useful habits and accomplishments. This quote underscores the importance of securing property rights for individuals who create or improve something through their efforts. Hume believes that protecting these rights encourages innovation and industry, which are beneficial to society as a whole. Quote 32. The safety of the people is the supreme law. All other particular laws are subordinate to it and dependent on it. Hume highlights that the most important law is the one that ensures the safety and well-being of society. All other laws, including those concerning property or justice, are secondary to this overarching principle, and they exist primarily to serve this greater goal. Quote 33. If the ideas of justice sometimes do not follow the dispositions of civil law, we shall find that these cases, instead of objections, are confirmations of the theory delivered above. Hume acknowledges that there are instances where justice may seem at odds with specific laws. However, he argues that these cases do not contradict his theory, but rather confirm it, as they reflect the flexibility and adaptability of justice when aligned with the broader public interest. Quote 34. There is this material difference between superstition and justice, that the former is frivolous, useless, and burdensome. The latter is absolutely requisite to the well-being of mankind and existence of society. Hume contrasts superstition with justice, stating that while superstitions are irrational and unnecessary, justice is essential for the survival and flourishing of society. This distinction reinforces the practical and foundational role justice plays in maintaining social order. Quote 35. The necessity of justice to the support of society is the sole foundation of that virtue. This quote reinforces Hume's belief that justice exists because it is necessary for the stability and continuation of society. The virtue of justice is not rooted in abstract principles, but in its practical role in ensuring the peace and order that allow human communities to function. Quote 36. The necessity of justice to the support of society is the sole foundation of that virtue, and since no moral excellence is more highly esteemed, we may conclude that this circumstance of usefulness has, in general, the strongest energy and most entire command over our sentiments. This quote asserts that justice derives its significance from its role in maintaining societal order. Hume suggests that the reason justice is so highly regarded as a moral virtue is because it is essential for the well-being and stability of society. Without its utility, justice would lose its importance. Quote 37. Had every man sufficient sagacity to perceive, at all times, the strong interest which binds him to the observance of justice and equity, there had never, in that case, been any such thing as government or political society. Hume argues that if individuals were always capable of understanding and acting in the best interests of society, there would be no need for governments. Government arises because people do not consistently act justly, necessitating laws and authority to maintain social order. Quote 38. When a number of political societies are erected and maintain a great intercourse together, a new set of rules are immediately discovered to be useful in that particular situation, and accordingly take place under the title of laws of nations. This quote highlights how new rules of justice, such as the laws governing nations, emerge when societies interact on a larger scale. These rules are shaped by the practical necessities of international relations, designed to facilitate peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit between different political entities. Quote 39. The long and helpless infancy of man requires the combination of parents for the subsistence of their young, and that combination requires the virtue of chastity or fidelity to the marriage bed. Hume points out that certain virtues, such as chastity and fidelity, are socially constructed because of their practical necessity. The need for parents to cooperate in raising their children leads to the development of rules around marriage and fidelity, showing how social utility shapes moral norms. Quote 40. Even in societies which are established on principles the most immoral and the most destructive to the interests of the general society, there are required certain rules which a species of false honor, as well as private interest, engages the members to observe. Hume observes that even in immoral societies, like those of robbers or pirates, rules of justice and equity must still exist for the society to function. This demonstrates that rules of fairness are a fundamental aspect of any social structure, regardless of its overall morality. Quote 41. Robbers and pirates, it has often been remarked, could not maintain their pernicious confederacy. Did they not establish a few distributive justice among themselves and recall those laws of equity, which they have violated with the rest of mankind? Hume emphasizes that even groups engaged in criminal activity need internal systems of justice to ensure cooperation among members. Without some adherence to fairness and equity within their own group, even the most destructive societies would collapse. Quote 42. The general societies of men are absolutely requisite for the subsistence of the species, and the public conveniency, which regulates morals, is inviolably established in the nature of man, and of the world in which he lives. This quote underscores the idea that human society and the moral rules that govern it are essential for human survival. Hume believes that the convenience of living together in an orderly society shapes and enforces the moral principles that we live by, as they are fundamental to our collective existence. Quote 43. Common interest and utility beget infallibly a standard of right and wrong among the parties concerned. Hume concludes that moral standards, especially in terms of justice and fairness, emerge naturally out of the shared interests and practical needs of society. Whether in peace or war, or even in everyday interactions, the common good creates an inherent sense of right and wrong. Quote 44. It seems so natural a thought to ascribe to their utility the praise which we bestow on the social virtues, that one would expect to meet with this principle everywhere in moral writers, as the chief foundation of their reasoning and inquiry. Hume begins by asserting that the utility of social virtues, such as justice and benevolence, explains why we praise them. He finds it surprising that this idea is not more prevalent in moral philosophy, given that the usefulness of these virtues is so often emphasized in everyday life. Quote 45. What wonder, then, that a man whose habits and conduct are hurtful to society and dangerous or pernicious to everyone who has an intercourse with him, should, on that account, be an object of disapprobation and communicate to every spectator the strongest sentiment of disgust and hatred. This quote highlights the natural response of disapproval and even disgust toward individuals whose behavior harms society. Hume suggests that it is no surprise that we feel negatively toward those who endanger the social fabric, as their actions are detrimental to collective well-being. Quote 46. From the apparent usefulness of the social virtues, it has readily been inferred by skeptics, both ancient and modern, that all moral distinctions arise from education, and were, at first, invented and afterwards encouraged by the art of politicians. Hume discusses the view that moral values were created by politicians to control people's natural selfishness and make them more cooperative. He acknowledges that education plays a role in shaping morality, but rejects the idea that all moral distinctions are purely artificial constructs imposed by authority. Quote 47. The social virtues must, therefore, be allowed to have a natural beauty and amiableness, which, at first, antecedent to all precept or education, recommends them to the esteem of uninstructed mankind, and engages their affections. Hume argues that virtues like kindness and justice have an inherent appeal that goes beyond education or cultural norms. People naturally admire these virtues because they benefit society, and this admiration exists even before any formal moral training or instruction. Quote 48. We frequently bestow praise on virtuous actions performed in very distant ages and remote countries, where the utmost subtlety of imagination would not discover any appearance of self-interest or find any connection of our present happiness and security with events so widely separated from us. Hume points out that people often praise virtuous actions from the distant past or from other cultures, even when there is no direct personal benefit. This observation challenges the idea that moral approval is always tied to self-interest, suggesting instead that we recognize virtue for its own sake. Quote 49. Usefulness is agreeable and engages our approbation. This is a matter of fact, confirmed by daily observation. Hume states that utility, or usefulness, is something that naturally attracts our approval. He suggests that we are inclined to value things based on their usefulness, and this observation is consistently supported by everyday experiences in human behavior and moral judgments. Quote 50. We must adopt a more public affection and allow that the interests of society are not, even on their own account, entirely indifferent to us. Hume argues that we are not entirely self-centered beings and that we possess an inherent concern for the welfare of society. This public affection allows us to care for societal well-being beyond our personal interests, which helps explain our moral sentiments toward social virtues like justice and benevolence. Quote 51. If usefulness, therefore, be a source of moral sentiment, and if this usefulness be not always considered with a reference to self, it follows that everything which contributes to the happiness of society recommends itself directly to our approbation and goodwill. This quote suggests that if utility is a key factor in our moral judgments, and it is not always tied to self-interest, then anything that promotes societal happiness naturally earns our approval. Hume uses this to support his broader claim that moral sentiment is deeply connected to the public good. Quote 52. The signs of sorrow and mourning, though arbitrary, affect us with melancholy, but the natural symptoms, tears and cries and groans, never fail to infuse compassion and uneasiness. Hume observes that while some expressions of grief may be culturally specific, natural signs of sorrow, such as tears and groans, universally evoke compassion. This indicates that humans have a natural, instinctive empathy for others' suffering, which plays a role in shaping our moral reactions. Quote 53. What wonder, then, if we can pronounce no judgment concerning the character and conduct of men without considering the tendencies of their actions and the happiness or misery which thence arises to society? Hume suggests that it is only natural to evaluate people's actions based on the effects those actions have on society. Our judgments about morality are inevitably linked to the consequences of behavior, especially whether it leads to happiness or misery in a social context. Quote 54. If the principles of humanity are capable, in many instances, of influencing our actions, they must, at all times, have some authority over our sentiments and give us a general approbation of what is useful to society, and blame of what is dangerous or pernicious. Hume believes that human nature includes an inherent sense of humanity, which influences both our actions and our moral judgments. This sense of humanity leads us to praise actions that benefit society and condemn those that harm it, showing how morality is deeply tied to social utility. Quote 55. It appears to be matter of fact that the circumstance of utility in all subjects is a source of praise and approbation. Hume asserts that usefulness is consistently recognized as a reason to praise something, whether it be a person, action, or even an object. This belief reinforces his argument that utility is a fundamental principle underlying moral approval. Quote 56. The more we converse with mankind, and the greater social intercourse we maintain, the more shall we be familiarized to these general preferences and distinctions, without which our conversation and discourse could scarcely be rendered intelligible to each other. Hume argues that social interactions reinforce shared moral standards and distinctions, such as what is considered virtuous or blameworthy. These shared standards are essential for meaningful communication and mutual understanding in society, indicating how moral judgments evolve through collective experience. Quote 57. It seems evident that where a quality or habit is subjected to our examination, if it appear in any respect prejudicial to the person possessed of it, or such as incapacitates him for business and action, it is instantly blamed and ranked among his faults and imperfections. Hume explains that when we observe qualities or habits in a person that hinder their ability to perform effectively in life, we naturally criticize those traits. Qualities like indolence or rashness are viewed as faults because they prevent individuals from being productive and achieving success. Quote 58. No quality, it is allowed, is absolutely either blamable or praiseworthy. It is all according to its degree. A due medium, says the Peripatetics, is the characteristic of virtue, but this medium is chiefly determined by utility. Hume argues that virtues exist in moderation, and it is the utility of a particular quality that determines whether it is good or bad. Extremes of any trait are not virtuous. Rather, it is the balance of the trait and its usefulness that defines its moral worth. Quote 59. Now, as these advantages are enjoyed by the person possessed of the character, it can never be self-love, which renders the prospect of them agreeable to us, the spectators, and prompts our esteem and approbation. Hume refutes the idea that our approval of someone's virtues stems from self-interest. He asserts that when we admire someone's character traits, it is not because we benefit directly from them, but because we recognize their value to the individual and society as a whole, independent of our personal gain. Quote 60. A man's time, when well husbanded, is like a cultivated field, of which a few acres produce more of what is useful to life than extensive provinces, even of the richest soil, when overrun with weeds and brambles. Hume emphasizes the importance of using time efficiently. He compares it to a well-managed field that, although small, yields more valuable crops than a large, unkempt land. This analogy underlines the significance of industry and frugality in achieving success. Quote 61. Qualities often derive their merit from complicated sources. Honesty, fidelity, truth are praised for their immediate tendency to promote the interests of society. But after those virtues are once established upon this foundation, they are also considered as advantageous to the person himself. Hume highlights that certain virtues like honesty and fidelity are valued not only because they benefit society, but also because they eventually enhance the individual's reputation and trustworthiness. Thus, these virtues have a dual merit. They serve both the public and the individual. Quote 62. Perhaps this consideration is one chief source of the high blame, which is thrown on any instance of failure among women in point of chastity. Hume observes that society places a particularly high value on women's chastity because it directly impacts their reputation. He explains that even a small lapse can severely damage a woman's social standing, as trust in her character is difficult to restore, unlike other virtues that can be redeemed through future actions. Quote 63. If refined sense and exalted sense be not so useful as common sense, their rarity, their novelty, and the nobleness of their objects make some compensation, and render them the admiration of mankind. Hume acknowledges that while practical common sense may be more useful in daily life, rare and elevated intellectual abilities are still admired because of their scarcity and the high ideals they represent. This admiration compensates for the lesser practical utility of these traits. Quote 64. The happiness and misery of others are not spectacles entirely indifferent to us, but that the view of the former, whether in its causes or effects, like sunshine or the prospect of well-cultivated plains, communicates a secret joy and satisfaction. Hume suggests that humans naturally derive pleasure from witnessing the happiness of others and feel discomfort when observing their suffering. This instinctive response reflects our inherent concern for the well-being of others, reinforcing his view that moral sentiments are deeply connected to empathy. Quote 65. There seems here a necessity for confessing that the happiness and misery of others are not spectacles entirely indifferent to us, but that the view of the former, whether in its causes or effects, like sunshine or the prospect of well-cultivated plains, communicates a secret joy and satisfaction. The appearance of the latter, like a lowering cloud or barren landscape, throws a melancholy damp over the imagination. Hume expresses that humans cannot remain indifferent to the happiness or misery of others. When we witness the well-being of others, it brings us a sense of joy, just as a beautiful landscape would. Conversely, seeing suffering or misfortune evokes a melancholic response, illustrating how deeply we are emotionally affected by the conditions of those around us. Quote 66. It is evident that one considerable source of beauty in all animals is the advantage which they reap from the particular structure of their limbs and members, suitably to the particular manner of life, to which they are by nature destined. Hume highlights that a key aspect of beauty in animals comes from how their bodies are suited to their natural purposes. The form of an animal is considered beautiful when its physical traits are well adapted to its way of life, reinforcing the idea that utility plays a role in our aesthetic judgments. Quote 67. A disposition or turn of mind, which qualifies a man to rise in the world and advance his fortune, is entitled to esteem and regard, as has already been explained. It may, therefore, naturally be supposed that the actual possession of riches and authority will have a considerable influence over these sentiments. Hume explains that certain mental qualities, such as ambition and determination, are respected because they enable individuals to achieve success. Consequently, wealth and power, which often result from these qualities, also attract esteem and admiration from others. Quote 68. A man who is himself, we shall suppose, of a competent fortune and of no profession, being introduced to a company of strangers, naturally treats them with different degrees of respect, as he is informed of their different fortunes and conditions. Hume observes that people tend to show varying levels of respect to others based on their wealth and social standing, even when they have no personal interest in benefiting from them. This respect is not necessarily about self-interest, but reflects society's broader admiration for those who possess wealth and influence. Quote 69. Riches are desired for ourselves only as the means of gratifying our appetites, either at present or in some imaginary future period. They beget esteem in others merely from their having that influence. Hume notes that wealth is valued primarily for its ability to satisfy desires, whether immediately or in the future. This ability to provide comfort and pleasure leads others to respect and admire those who are rich, as wealth is seen as a source of power over life's comforts. Quote 70. What else do we mean by saying that one is rich, the other poor? And as regard or contempt is the natural consequence of those different situations in life, it is easily seen what additional light and evidence this throws on our preceding theory, with regard to all moral distinctions. Hume emphasizes that when we label someone as rich or poor, it is based on their access to resources and comforts. The respect or disdain we feel for individuals based on their wealth or poverty further supports the idea that moral distinctions are influenced by utility and the capacity to fulfill needs. Quote 71. A man who has cured himself of all ridiculous prepossessions and is fully, sincerely, and steadily convinced, from experience as well as philosophy, that the difference of fortune makes less difference in happiness than is vulgarly imagined. Such a one does not measure out degrees of esteem according to the rent rolls of his acquaintance. Hume argues that a wise and experienced individual, free from societal biases, understands that wealth does not significantly determine happiness. Such a person judges others based on their character rather than their wealth, recognizing that external fortune is not the primary factor in a fulfilling life. Quote 72. Power and riches commonly cause respect, poverty and meanness contempt, though particular views and incidents may sometimes raise the passions of envy and of pity. Hume asserts that wealth and power generally elicit respect, while poverty leads to contempt. However, he also acknowledges that specific circumstances can evoke other emotions, such as envy or pity, highlighting the complexity of human responses to wealth and social status. Quote 73. Cheerfulness carries great merit with it, and naturally conciliates the goodwill of mankind. No quality, indeed, more readily communicates itself to all around. Hume points out the natural appeal of cheerfulness, noting how it easily spreads among people and creates a pleasant atmosphere. A cheerful disposition fosters goodwill and positivity, drawing others in and making them feel uplifted by the presence of such a person. Quote 74. He is a more animating spectacle. His presence diffuses over us more serene complacency and enjoyment. Our imagination, entering into his feelings and disposition, is affected in a more agreeable manner than if a melancholy, dejected, sullen, anxious temper were presented to us. Hume suggests that people with lively, positive dispositions have a refreshing and uplifting effect on those around them. Their cheerful presence engages the imagination and creates a sense of joy, in contrast to the negative impact of being around melancholic or anxious individuals. Quote 75. Not only such men, as Caesar adds, are commonly dangerous, but also, having little enjoyment within themselves, they can never become agreeable to others, or contribute to social entertainment. This quote emphasizes that people who are joyless or lacking in personal contentment are not only potentially dangerous, but also fail to bring pleasure or contribute to the enjoyment of social gatherings. Their inability to find joy within makes them less appealing in social settings. Quote 76. Who is not struck with any signal instance of greatness of mind or dignity of character, with elevation of sentiment, disdain of slavery, and with that noble pride and spirit which arises from conscious virtue? Hume highlights the admiration people feel for those with strong moral character and a sense of dignity. Such individuals demonstrate a refusal to submit to degradation, and their confidence in their virtue elevates them in the eyes of others, inspiring respect and admiration. Quote 77. A certain degree of generous pride or self-value is so requisite that the absence of it in the mind displeases, after the same manner as the want of a nose, eye, or any of the most material feature of the face or member of the body. Hume argues that just as physical deformities can be displeasing, the absence of self-respect or pride in a person's character is equally unattractive. A lack of dignity or self-worth is perceived as a flaw, one that diminishes the individual's overall presence and value in society. Quote 78. The utility of courage, both to the public and to the person possessed of it, is an obvious foundation of merit. But to anyone who duly considers of the matter, it will appear that this quality has a peculiar luster, which it derives wholly from itself, and from that noble elevation inseparable from it. Hume recognizes the practical benefits of courage for both society and the individual, but he also notes that courage carries an intrinsic nobility. Its greatness stems not just from its usefulness, but from the inherent dignity and boldness it represents, making it a virtue admired for its own sake. Quote 79. The excessive bravery and resolute inflexibility of Charles XVIII ruined his own country, and infested all his neighbors, but have such splendor and greatness in their appearance as strikes us with admiration. Hume reflects on the paradox of extreme courage, as seen in historical figures like Charles X. While his bravery brought great harm to his own nation and others, the sheer boldness of his actions still commands admiration. This shows how even destructive courage can evoke awe due to its grandiosity. Quote 80. The prudence, address, steadiness, and benign government of Augustus, adorned with all the splendor of his noble birth and imperial crown, render him but an unequal competitor for fame with Virgil, who lays nothing into the opposite scale but the divine beauties of his poetical genius. Hume contrasts the lasting fame of a great ruler, Augustus, with that of Virgil, whose poetic genius outshines even the most noble political achievements. This statement highlights how artistic brilliance, particularly in creating beauty through poetry, can elevate an individual above even the most powerful of leaders. Quote 81. The very sensibility to these beauties, or a delicacy of taste, is itself a beauty in any character, as conveying the purest, the most durable, and most innocent of all enjoyments. Hume asserts that having a refined sense of beauty, or taste, is a virtue in itself. This quality offers an individual the deepest and most innocent form of enjoyment, as it allows them to appreciate the subtleties and beauty in life, elevating their character in the eyes of others. Quote 82. As the mutual shocks in society and the oppositions of interest and self-love have constrained mankind to establish the laws of justice in order to preserve the advantages of mutual assistance and protection, in like manner, the eternal contrarieties, in company, of men's pride and self-conceit have introduced the rules of good manners or politeness in order to facilitate the intercourse of minds, and an undisturbed commerce and conversation. Hume compares the establishment of justice to the creation of politeness and good manners. Just as laws were developed to manage conflicts of interest in society, social etiquette arose to handle the clashes of pride and ego during personal interactions, ensuring smooth and pleasant conversations. Quote 83. But, in order to render a man perfect good company, he must have wit and ingenuity as well as good manners. Hume explains that while good manners are essential, they are not sufficient on their own to make someone enjoyable company. A person must also possess wit and cleverness, which contribute to lively and engaging conversations, making them truly agreeable to others. Quote 84. Eloquence, genius of all kinds, even good sense and sound reasoning, when it rises to an eminent degree and is employed upon subjects of any considerable dignity and nice discernment. All these endowments seem immediately agreeable, and have a merit distinct from their usefulness. Hume points out that intellectual qualities such as eloquence, genius, and sound reasoning are valued not only for their practical benefits, but also for the pleasure they provide. These traits are appreciated in their own right because they elevate discourse and stimulate the mind. Quote 85. Men have, in general, a much greater propensity to overvalue than undervalue themselves, notwithstanding the opinion of Aristotle. Hume observes that people tend to overestimate their own worth more frequently than they undervalue themselves, contrary to what Aristotle believed. This tendency to inflate self-worth leads to behaviors that often need to be tempered by modesty in order to maintain social harmony. Quote 86. A desire of fame, reputation, or a character with others is so far from being blamable that it seems inseparable from virtue, genius, capacity, and a generous or noble disposition. Hume argues that the desire for fame and reputation is not inherently bad, but is instead a natural part of possessing virtue, talent, or greatness of character. Seeking recognition for one's accomplishments aligns with having a noble and generous disposition. Quote 87. Decency, or a proper regard to age, sex, character, and station in the world, may be ranked among the qualities which are immediately agreeable to others, and which, by that means, acquire praise and approbation. Hume emphasizes that decency, showing appropriate behavior based on someone's age, gender, or social status, is a quality that is immediately pleasing to others. This ability to act with decorum is universally praised because it reflects a sensitivity to social norms and expectations. Quote 88. We approve of another because of his wit, politeness, modesty, decency, or any agreeable quality which he possesses, although he be not of our acquaintance, nor has ever given us any entertainment, by means of these accomplishments. Hume points out that we often admire people for qualities such as wit, politeness, and modesty, even if we do not know them personally. The mere idea of someone possessing these attributes pleases us and leads to a positive judgment of their character, demonstrating how certain virtues evoke universal approval. Quote 89. It may justly appear surprising that any man in so late an age should find it requisite to prove, by elaborate reasoning, that personal merit consists altogether in the possession of mental qualities, useful or agreeable to the person himself or to others. Hume expresses astonishment that something as obvious as the idea that personal merit is based on qualities that are either useful or agreeable should still need to be proven in his time. He suggests that this principle is so self-evident that it should not require deep philosophical debate, indicating that any deviation from this view comes from misguided theories. Quote 90. As every quality which is useful or agreeable to ourselves or others is, in common life, allowed to be a part of personal merit, so no other will ever be received, where men judge of things by their natural, unprejudiced reason, without the delusive glosses of superstition and false religion. Hume argues that in everyday life, people naturally judge personal merit based on qualities that are useful or agreeable. He criticizes the influence of superstition and false religion, which he believes distort this natural reasoning, leading to the valuing of qualities that do not genuinely benefit individuals or society. Quote 91. It seems a happiness in the present theory that it enters not into that vulgar dispute concerning the degrees of benevolence or self-love which prevail in human nature. Hume is relieved that his theory avoids the endless debate over whether human beings are more driven by benevolence or self-love. He believes that this argument is irrelevant to his point, which is that there is some degree of benevolence in everyone, sufficient to ground moral judgments without needing to measure its exact strength. Quote 92. A moral distinction, therefore, immediately arises, a general sentiment of blame and approbation, a tendency, however faint, to the objects of the one, and a proportionable aversion to those of the other. Hume suggests that even a small spark of humanity in each person allows for moral distinctions. This basic tendency toward approving what is beneficial to society and disapproving of what is harmful forms the foundation of moral judgment, regardless of how strong or weak this impulse may be in individuals. Quote 93. The notion of morals implies some sentiment common to all mankind, which recommends the same object to general approbation, and makes every man, or most men, agree in the same opinion or decision concerning it. Hume asserts that moral judgments are grounded in sentiments shared by all humans. This universality of feeling is what allows people to agree on what is virtuous or blameworthy, creating a common moral framework that transcends individual differences in personal interests. Quote 94. What is beneficial to society or to the person himself must still be preferred, and every quality or action of every human being must, by this means, be ranked under some class or denomination, expressive of general censure or applause. Hume argues that all actions and qualities, whether of individuals or society, are judged based on their usefulness. Every trait or behavior is classified as either virtuous or vicious, based on whether it promotes well-being or harm, demonstrating that utility is central to moral evaluation. Quote 95. Virtue and vice become then known. Morals are recognized. Certain general ideas are framed of human conduct and behavior. Such measures are expected from men in such situations. Hume explains that once these general sentiments of approval and disapproval are established, concepts of virtue and vice naturally emerge. These moral judgments shape societal expectations of how people should act in particular situations, creating a shared understanding of ethical behavior. Quote 96. Another spring of our Constitution that brings a great addition of force to moral sentiments is the love of fame, which rules with such uncontrolled authority in all generous minds and is often the grand object of all their designs and undertakings. Hume identifies the desire for fame and reputation as a powerful motivator for moral behavior. This ambition drives people, particularly those with noble or generous natures, to act virtuously, not only for their own satisfaction, but also to earn the respect and admiration of others. Quote 97. What philosophical truths can be more advantageous to society than those here delivered, which represent virtue in all her genuine and most engaging charms, and makes us approach her with ease, familiarity, and affection? Hume praises the philosophical truths about virtue presented in his work, arguing that these truths depict virtue as something approachable and attractive. He emphasizes that virtue is not about harsh self-denial, but is instead rooted in qualities like humanity, gentleness, and joy, making it easier for people to embrace and practice moral goodness in their lives. Quote 98. She declares that her sole purpose is to make her votaries and all mankind, during every instant of their existence, if possible, cheerful and happy. Nor does she ever willingly part with any pleasure, but in hopes of ample compensation in some other period of their lives. Hume personifies virtue, portraying it as seeking to ensure the happiness of those who practice it. Virtue is not about self-sacrifice for its own sake, but about pursuing happiness in a balanced way, only giving up short-term pleasures when greater rewards are anticipated in the future. Quote 99. Whatever contradiction may vulgarly be supposed between the selfish and social sentiments or dispositions, they are really no more opposite than selfish and ambitious, selfish and revengeful, selfish and vain. Hume argues that there is no inherent conflict between self-interest and social virtues. Just as other desires like ambition or revenge can coexist with self-interest, so too can benevolence and generosity be aligned with one's personal happiness and satisfaction. Quote 100. It would be difficult to show why a man is more a loser by a generous action than by any other method of expense, since the utmost which he can attain by the most elaborate selfishness is the indulgence of some affection. Hume suggests that a person loses nothing by being generous, just as they lose nothing by indulging other desires. Both acts fulfill human needs, and generosity offers the same kind of emotional satisfaction as any other pursuit, making it just as rewarding. Quote 101. Every affection, he would observe, when gratified by success, gives a satisfaction proportioned to its force and violence. But besides this advantage, common to all, the immediate feeling of benevolence and friendship, humanity and kindness, is sweet, smooth, tender, and agreeable, independent of all fortune and accidents. Hume points out that while all desires bring satisfaction when fulfilled, the feelings of benevolence, friendship, and kindness stand out for their gentleness and pleasantness. These virtues provide a stable, enduring sense of contentment that is not dependent on external circumstances. Quote 102. Inward peace of mind, consciousness of integrity, a satisfactory review of our own conduct. These are circumstances very requisite to happiness and will be cherished and cultivated by every honest man who feels the importance of them. Hume highlights the value of inner peace and integrity, explaining that these qualities are essential for true happiness. A virtuous person gains fulfillment from knowing they have acted morally and honorably, which brings a deeper and more lasting sense of satisfaction than any external rewards. Quote 103. How little is requisite to supply the necessities of nature? And, in a view to pleasure, what comparison between the unbought satisfaction of conversation, society, study, even health and the common beauties of nature, but above all the peaceful reflection on one's own conduct? Hume reflects on the simplicity of true pleasure, arguing that the most satisfying aspects of life, conversation, society, learning, health, nature, and self-reflection, are not only accessible, but also provide a richer and more profound happiness than material wealth or luxury. Quote 104. The virtues which are immediately useful or agreeable to the person possessed of them are desirable in a view to self-interest. It would surely be superfluous to prove. Hume states that it is obvious that virtues that are useful or agreeable to an individual are in their self-interest. Such virtues naturally bring benefits to the person practicing them, making their value self-evident without the need for further argument. An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals by David Hume concludes by underscoring the importance of moral sentiments and their connection to human welfare. Hume reinforces the idea that virtues like justice, benevolence, and prudence derive their value from their beneficial effects on society and individuals. Rather than relying solely on rational deductions, he argues that moral principles are deeply rooted in human emotions and the natural sympathy we feel for others. By doing so, Hume effectively bridges the gap between philosophical theory and practical human experience, promoting a view of ethics that celebrates both reason and feeling as fundamental to our understanding of what it means to live virtuously.
Curious to dive into the mind of David Hume? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of an inquiry concerning the principles of morals in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.